Robert Baratheon stood in his solar, the coals in the hearth reduced to dull embers. Shadows slanted across the walls, cast by a single guttering candle. The cold of winter pressed in beyond the stone, but Robert barely felt it. Too many thoughts whirled through his mind, too many burdens weighed upon him. Word had come that Daenerys Targaryen was gathering allies in Pentos, that the Vale conspiracy had been crushed but at great cost, that rebellious undercurrents still existed in corners of his realm. Yet he also knew that he was no longer the complacent, indulgent king who had let the realm drift. He was prepared to face the challenges ahead, clear-headed and resolute. When at last his eyes grew too heavy to stay open, Robert stripped off his heavy cloak and sank onto the bed. Even then, sleep claimed him only in fits, haunted by half-coherent dreams of flaming dragons and raging storms. He woke before dawn, as he often did now, and threw on a simpler tunic, the wool comfortable against his skin. He belted a dagger at his hip, not for any practical reason within the safety of the Red Keep, but because the weight steadied him. Crossing the corridors with purposeful strides, he made his way to the training yard, wanting to work through the tension in his limbs. The sky still hovered between night and morning, its violet hue giving way to the barest traces of gray. A handful of men, guards, a few knights, lingered in the yard, stamping their feet against the cold. Robert nodded at them, wordlessly selecting a practice sword from the racks. He began a solitary routine of strikes and parries, each motion mechanical, drilling his muscle memory into sharper readiness. His breath formed clouds in the icy air, each exhalation a small release of pent-up frustration. Eventually, a pair of the gold cloaks joined him for light sparring. Robert accepted their challenge, forcing himself to remain calm and precise. The ring of wooden swords broke the hush of dawn. Felt good to move, to sweat out the lingering nightmares. For a moment, the monarchy's burdens seemed distant, overshadowed by the immediate puzzle of timing and footwork. After a vigorous set of rounds, he dismissed the gold cloaks, praising their form. They bowed, looking somewhat surprised that the king himself took time to see them improve. Robert was not the man he'd once been. He no longer sneered at discipline, nor did he hide in the bottle from everything that worried him. A page approached, timidly holding a lantern. "Your Grace, Lord Stark requests your presence in the small council chamber when you've finished." Robert nodded. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." The page scurried off. Robert took a few moments to cool down, then walked back through the halls, ignoring the chill sweat on his skin. Servants began their morning bustle, carrying platters and linens, lighting the hearths in the corridors. Robert caught a few of them darting curious glances at his ruddy cheeks and disheveled hair. None of them expected to see the king out so early unless he was returning from a night of carousing. Things had changed. In his private chamber, he splashed water on his face, changed into a warmer doublet of deep blue velvet stitched with the gold Baratheon stag, and settled his crown atop his hair, lighter than the war crown he'd worn at his coronation, but still heavy enough to remind him of what he carried. He checked his reflection in a polished metal mirror, noting the lines on his face, the streaks of gray in his hair. He was older, but not broken. A new sort of vigor shone in his eyes. Satisfied, he headed to the small council chamber. On arrival, he found Ned Stark, Renly Baratheon, Grand Maester Pycelle, Varys, and Peter Baelish already seated. The usual hush accompanied his entry, and the council members rose in a token bow. Robert gestured for them to sit, taking his place at the head of the table. "Good morning," he said, voice echoing slightly in the lofty room. "What news?" Ned cleared his throat. "Two matters are pressing. First, a rider from the Stormlands brings rumors that another small group of raiders landed on an isolated beach north of Griffin's Roost. They fled before the local levies could confront them, leaving behind little but burned huts. No confirmed link to Targaryen forces, but the parallels are too great to ignore." Robert's jaw tightened. "We'll need to bolster patrols again. Make sure the local lords have enough men to respond swiftly. I won't let a few raiders terrorize my lands." Renly leaned forward. "I've spoken with several stormlords who are willing to form a coastal watch. We can distribute war galleys at intervals, a small force in each cove or inlet. But that requires coin, and many of these lords expect some compensation from the crown. They claim their finances are already stretched from the last set of measures. Littlefinger put on a thin smile. We do remain, shall we say, constrained by the budget. If we must fund expansions in the Stormlands, we'll need to consider raising certain tariffs again or seeking a new loan. Robert growled low in his throat. Damned if we do, damned if we don't. We can't leave our shores undefended. Find the coin, Peter. If we must cut spending elsewhere, do it. He glanced around the table. A short-term cost is better than open raids. If we pinch coppers and let the raids continue, we risk far more damage to trade and morale. Littlefinger inclined his head. As you say, Your Grace. Ned picked up a second parchment. The other matter is more domestic. A group of merchants from Lannisport claim the crown is interfering with their trade routes, citing new inspections for contraband. They complain that these inspections slow business and cost them coin. They've petitioned your brother, Stannis, who apparently has little sympathy, but they've now come here to request a royal hearing. Robert leaned back in his chair, massaging the bridge of his nose. Lannisport merchants. So, effectively Lannister men complaining about losing a few dragons to inspections. Do we have reason to believe they're smuggling anything of note? Varys murmured. Some rumor suggests certain Lannisport vessels might be carrying high-value goods for resale in Essos. Exotic animal parts, perhaps substances restricted by the Crown's trade laws. My little birds say it's likely they're skirting official tariffs. The new inspections hamper their profit. Hence the complaint. Robert half smiled, though there was little mirth in it. So they're upset they can't dodge the Crown's laws as easily as before. Let them bring their complaint. I'll hear them, but I'll not apologize for enforcing our own trade rules. Renly tapped a finger on the table. Perhaps a compromise could be reached. If we ease certain restrictions, they might pay an upfront fee. Could net the Crown a tidy sum while still discouraging full-blown smuggling. Robert nodded slowly. Fine. Arrange a hearing for these merchants. I'll listen to their grievances. If a compromise benefits the realm, I'll entertain it. But no illusions. I won't let them cheat us blind. He turned next to Pycelle, the oldest man at the table, whose bushy white eyebrows rose at the king's glance. Grand Maester, any word of the harvest or winter maladies? Pycelle inclined his head, beard bristling. Your Grace, the harvest from the Reach has been plentiful, though the snows have slowed transport. I've heard a few accounts of a fever spreading in the Riverlands, but so far it appears contained. Lord Edmure Tully is sending healers to the afflicted villages. There is no indication of a widespread outbreak. As for the capital, the maesters remain vigilant, but no unusual sickness has been reported. Good, Robert said. Keep me informed if that changes. Varys cleared his throat with a practiced softness. There is one other matter, Your Grace. A certain note from the Free Cities suggests that envoys from Braavos may visit soon to ensure we remain on schedule with our debt payments. A courtesy call, if you will. Robert scowled but nodded. Let them come. We're paying as arranged, yes, Littlefinger? Littlefinger's smirk barely moved. Oh yes, Your Grace, with only minimal delays on some installments. The Iron Bank likely wishes to confirm our stability. Then they'll see a stable throne, Robert said. Now, enough council talk. We have duties to attend. He dismissed them, rising from his seat with a sense of relief. Often these meetings felt unending, but each concluded item reminded him that he was actively governing, not avoiding the realm's problems. The council members filed out, each on their own tasks. Robert lingered for a few moments in the empty chamber, running a hand over the smooth wooden table. He remembered times when he had slouched here, half drunk or bored, letting others speak around him as if he were scarcely present. Those days were gone. He would not slip back into that cowardice. Stepping outside, Robert ran into Ser Barristan Selmy, who had only just returned from his victory in the Vale. The old knight bowed lightly. Your Grace, I wish to report that the last of the Vale prisoners have been escorted to the dungeons. The majority of their retinues are scattered or have sworn oaths of loyalty anew. The veil is quieting again. Excellent, Robert said with genuine warmth. You've done the realm a great service, Barristan. Any trouble left? Some scattered outlaws remain in the mountains, Barristan conceded. They have no real leadership now that the main conspirators are dealt with. I trust the Vale Lords can handle them, as they've handled mountain clans for years. Lady Lisa eventually emerged from the Eyrie once our victory was certain. She thanked us stiffly. She seemed wary of your presence in her domain. Robert snorted. That's Lisa Arryn, flighty as a startled bird. She'll settle down. So, you're telling me the rebellion is well and truly crushed? Barristan nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. Yes, Your Grace. House Arryn's bannermen who remain loyal are sufficient to keep the Vale secure. Robert clapped the knight on the shoulder. Rest, Barristan, and see to your men. You've earned it. Barristan bowed and departed, his white cloak trailing behind him. Robert felt a surge of satisfaction. One threat contained, at least. The Vale would not undermine him again soon. But the Targaryen question lingered, as did the notion that somewhere across the sea, a silver-haired girl might be plotting her return, building alliances day by day. Striding through the corridors, Robert allowed his mind to wander. His footsteps took him to the throne room, mostly empty at this hour except for a few patrolling guards. He walked up the long aisle toward the Iron Throne, the twisted metal seat looming in the dim light. Stopping before it, he gazed upon the blade points and edges hammered together in the days of Aegon the Conqueror. Once he had resented this seat. Even now, he felt a pang of anger at all it demanded of him. But he also felt a curious sense of ownership. He had bled for it, and though he had once tried to escape his responsibilities, he was done running. He ascended the steps slowly. Each clank of his boots on the metal echoed. Then he turned and sat upon the throne, feeling its cold bite against his back. A guard watched from afar, but did not approach. Robert stared out over the empty hall, imagining it filled with lords and ladies, knights and petitioners. He remembered first claiming this seat in triumph, the great rebellion ended, Rhaegar Targaryen slain. He had never guessed that Shadow would reemerge so many years later, wearing a different face. His hand drifted to the arm of the throne, where the metal twisted into points. Lyanna's face flickered through his mind, her laughter, her wild spirit. He closed his eyes, exhaling. That was a lifetime ago. All that remained was to preserve the kingdom he had won, to ensure the chaos of that era never returned. A subtle rasp of footsteps broke his reverie. Robert opened his eyes to see Ned Stark approaching, helmet under his arm. He hesitated at the base of the throne, then bowed. "Your Grace," Ned said softly. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You never disturb me, Ned," Robert replied. "Come." Ned climbed the steps, stopping a few feet below the throne, which was still a small break with etiquette. No one but the king was meant to stand so close. But Robert didn't mind. Ned, more than anyone, had earned the right. "You look as though you were deep in thought," Ned observed, glancing around the empty hall. Robert's lips twisted in a wry smile. "Remember when we stormed this place after the rebellion? I never imagined I'd be the man sitting here years later, worrying over trade tariffs and scraps of raids. Gods, I almost wish for a straightforward battle. Sometimes you know exactly who your enemy is and how to fight him." Ned studied him. "Yet battles can be as twisted as politics. Rhaegar's death weighed heavily on you once." Robert nodded slowly. "Aye, that it did. But at least I knew where I stood on that battlefield. These days, the realm is a puzzle with 1,000 pieces. If I misstep, I risk fracturing it all over again." They fell silent. Robert felt a deep trust in Ned's presence, comforted that he was not alone in carrying the realm's burdens. After a moment, Ned cleared his throat. "I came to tell you that Joffrey's tutors complain he refuses to attend his lessons again," Ned said, voice subdued. "He's in the courtyard now with the Hound, practicing swordplay. He insisted he doesn't need scholarly pursuits." Robert exhaled. "The boy is stubborn as a mule. But ignoring statecraft is a fool's path. Ned lowered his eyes. I'm reluctant to force him physically, but perhaps a stern word from you might help. The king considered. The last time I chastised him publicly, he nearly lost his wits. Yet if he's to inherit the throne— Robert stopped, the words catching in his throat. If he's to inherit, he must at least pretend to learn the realm's laws. Ned gently spoke. May I suggest a private conversation more measured than before? We can't let him flout his duties without consequence. Robert mulled it over. Fine, I'll speak to him. Not here in the throne room. Perhaps a quieter place, away from an audience. Maybe he'll listen if he doesn't feel challenged in front of everyone. Ned seemed relieved. I'll arrange for the tutors to be available tomorrow morning. If you can speak with him beforehand, let him know the importance. I will, Robert said. We'll see if reason can penetrate that thick head. Ned bowed again, then descended the steps. Robert lingered for a beat on the Iron Throne before following, stepping down to the floor with a faint clang of armor. The two old friends left the throne room side by side, exchanging a few words about the next day's schedule. For all the frustration, Robert was determined not to give up on Joffrey just yet. The realm might hinge on that boy's future or, gods forbid, on a succession crisis if Robert formally disowned him. In the courtyard, Robert found Ser Sandor Clegane, better known as the Hound, observing Joffrey's attempts at sword practice. 3 young squires took turns facing the prince, each quickly outmatched by Joffrey's surprisingly quick strikes. Joffrey had some skill, though he lacked discipline and too often took cheap shots. Still, the boy seemed in earnest about swordsmanship at least. Robert crossed his arms, watching from a distance as Joffrey disarmed one squire with a jarring blow. The lad yelped, dropping his wooden sword. Joffrey laughed cruelly, stepping forward to strike the boy's chest with the flat of the blade, sending him sprawling. The other squires exchanged uneasy glances. The Hound stood impassively, arms folded, giving no sign of approval or disapproval. That's enough, the Hound said in his rough voice. He's beaten. I decide when it's enough, Joffrey snapped, but he lowered his weapon, glancing around as though to see if anyone dared contradict him. His gaze landed on Robert and Ned, standing under the shadow of an archway. The boy's face hardened, but he bowed stiffly, an attempt at respect. Father, Lord Stark. Robert nodded. Your form is improving. Joffrey brightened a fraction, as though starving for praise. I'm told I have a natural gift. I'll surpass all knights soon enough. The arrogance grated on Robert, but he kept his tone measured. Skill with a blade is worthwhile, especially for a prince. But you'll find that ruling takes more than swordplay. Joffrey's expression shuddered. He lowered the wooden blade. I'm not interested in the mulings of tutors or scribes. My time is better spent perfecting the sword. And how will you manage a kingdom with no knowledge of its laws, no understanding of its history or economy? Robert pressed. If you take that attitude, you'll find men refusing to follow your orders. Joffrey rolled his eyes, though he tried to be subtle about it. That's what the Hand is for, counselors, advisors. A king shouldn't need to do the scribe's work. He has better uses of his time. Robert's temper flared, but he recalled Ned's advice and forced himself to remain calm. If you rely on others for everything, you'll be their puppet. True leadership requires understanding, Joffrey. Even I, who won the throne by war, realized that. Joffrey scowled, but the words seemed to give him pause. He cast a glance at the Hound, who remained silent. Sandor Clegane never sugarcoated reality, so perhaps Joffrey sought validation of some kind, but none was forthcoming. Finally, the prince grumbled, Fine, I'll attend a lesson or two, but I won't be bored to death. Robert eased a breath, nodding. It's a start. Show some respect to your tutors, or you'll answer to me. A flash of resentment crossed Joffrey's face. Understood. He tossed the wooden sword to a waiting page, then turned abruptly to Ser Sandor. Come, I want to spar with steel next time. The Hound gave Robert a quick glance, then nodded, following Joffrey toward the armory. Robert watched them go, hearing Joffrey's sharp commands to a stable boy in the distance. Ned stood beside Robert, face unreadable. "You reined in your temper," Ned said quietly. Robert exhaled. "Barely. The boy's arrogance tests me, but at least he agreed to attend some lessons. Perhaps that's something." Ned offered a small smile. Better than open defiance. They parted ways, Ned heading to oversee certain administrative matters while Robert returned to his solar. There, a small mountain of letters awaited him, brought by a steward with a timid bow. Some bore seals from noble houses in the Crownlands or Stormlands, probably requests for coin or judgments on land disputes. One letter, though, carried a foreign sigil reminiscent of the Iron Bank, likely from the Braavosi envoys. Robert resigned himself to a day of reading and responding, the sword replaced by parchment. He worked through the letters methodically. Most were mundane. Complaints about taxes, minor squabbles between houses. A letter from House Penrose thanked him for assigning a new castellan to a border keep. Another from House Selmy, Barristan's kin, offered praises for the king's swift justice in the Vale. Robert's eyebrows rose at the flattery, but he recognized a subtle request for a new trade charter hidden in their polite words. He penned a brief, non-committal response, promising to review the matter. Finally, he reached the Braavosi letter. As expected, it was a polite inquiry about scheduling a visit to King's Landing, to discuss the Crown's continued commitment to timely repayments. Robert knew well that behind Braavosi courtesy lay ironclad calculation. They likely wanted to assess the stability of the realm for themselves, ensuring no potential rebellion or foreign incursion endangered their investment. He drafted a short reply, graciously inviting them to come at their earliest convenience, emphasizing that the Crown was in excellent hands and that payments remained on schedule. He would not appear weak or hesitant. When all was done, Robert realized the sun had swung high in the sky. His stomach rumbled. He summoned a servant, requesting a simple midday meal, some stew, bread, and ale. Since giving up heavy drinking, he allowed himself the occasional mug of ale or small beer, never enough to dull his senses. He ate quickly in the solar, scanning the next day's appointments. Among them, a hearing with the Lannisport merchants. The mere thought of dealing with Lannister-affiliated traders who complained about stricter trade laws grated at him, but if listening to them cooled tensions, so be it. Before returning to the monotony of letters, Robert felt a sudden restlessness. He left the Red Keep, striding into the city proper with only a small escort of gold cloaks. He'd done this sort of unannounced inspection before, ensuring the small folk saw him outside the palace walls. The guards at the gate, surprised but not unaccustomed, saluted as the king and his men passed. King's Landing spread before him, crowded and chaotic as ever. Narrow streets bustled with vendors hawking everything from produce to cheap jewelry. The air smelled of roasting meats, dung, and sea brine wafting in from the Blackwater. Robert pushed through the throng, his guards forming a loose ring around him to prevent jostling. People recognized him, some stepping aside in awe, others bowing. A few even cheered. The king's presence among the common folk was still something of a novelty, especially since his reforms had improved bread prices and curbed corruption in the city watch. He stopped at a cloth merchant's stall, eyeing bolts of wool and linen. The merchant, a wiry woman with a keen smile, beamed to see him. "Your Grace, an honor. Our cloth is the finest in Flea Bottom, I promise you." Robert chuckled. "Flea Bottom's finest, eh? My mother once had a seamstress from these parts. I remember good wool." He ran his hands over the fabric, coarse but serviceable. "You do decent work." The woman glowed at the compliment, and a small crowd began to gather. Robert spoke briefly, asking if the city watch had caused her any trouble. She answered eagerly that the watch was better now. Fewer bribes demanded, though sometimes new fees for shipping wagons weighed on her business. Robert made a mental note to see if the Crown could streamline local fees. With a parting nod, he moved on, exchanging short words with a carpenter, a fish vendor, and a group of washerwomen hanging laundry between two rickety buildings. Each offered him bits of gossip about city life. Talk that crime had shifted more to the outskirts, that beggars had moved near the sept for alms. No single revelation was dramatic, but together they built a picture of how King's Landing fared under his watch. As he circled back toward the Red Keep, a young boy darted in front of him, breathless. The gold cloak stiffened, but Robert signaled them to hold. The lad, perhaps 10 years of age, wore ragged clothes and clutched a small package in his hands. His wide eyes brimmed with awe as he realized he stood before the king. You're the king," the boy stammered. "And my mother. She told me if I ever saw you to say thank you." Robert frowned gently. "Thank you for what, lad?" For the bread. We was starving once. Last winter. But then the king stopped the men who was hoarding flour. Prices went down, and mother could buy bread again." He bowed, fumbling with the package. "I only have this, your grace. Some spiced fish mother prepared. It's good, I swear." Robert's chest tightened. Memories of the old days, when he would have ignored such gratitude, flashed through him. Kneeling, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You owe me nothing. Keep your fish for yourself and your mother. Just take care of each other." The boy stared, stunned, then grinned with all the bright innocence of youth. Robert rose, ruffling the boy's hair. The gold cloaks guided him aside, and Robert resumed his walk with a softened expression. For all the heaviness and danger in the realm, such moments reminded him why he bothered to govern. Back in the Red Keep, he returned to his solar, the sense of restlessness eased. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of minor tasks, meeting with the master of the kitchens about winter supply needs, signing off on repairs to a crumbling section of the keep's outer walls, reviewing the training schedules for the city watch. By the time dusk settled, Robert's eyes burned from reading and his shoulders felt stiff. He supped with Renly and a few Stormlords who had arrived earlier in the day, men he'd known since the rebellion. They spoke of old battles, but more often they spoke of new concerns, coastal defenses, the possibility of war with a Targaryen host. Robert made sure they understood the crown was serious about protecting the Stormlands. The men left the table with a renewed sense of loyalty, each promising to muster men quickly if the king called. The next morning, Robert woke early again, determined to confront the Lannisport merchants. After a brief breakfast, he convened a session in the throne room. The merchants arrived in a group of 5, each wearing fine clothes and an air of nervous confidence. Robert ascended the Iron Throne with Ned Stark at his side, while Pycelle and Littlefinger observed from seats along the dais. A scattering of courtiers and lesser lords looked on, curious about how the king would treat these famously wealthy men from Lannisport. The lead merchant, a balding fellow named Hadron Brax, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your Grace, we come with great respect for the crown and gratitude for the protection it offers. Yet we face hardships due to recent inspections on our ships. The delays cut into our profits and hamper trade with Essos." Robert's gaze swept over them. "So you say, those inspections exist to curb smuggling and ensure contraband doesn't enter or leave our ports without paying due taxes. Are you telling me your shipments are all above board?" Brax placed a hand over his heart. "Absolutely, Your Grace. We trade only in legitimate goods, wool, metals, the occasional spice. We have nothing to hide. But the wait times at the docks, it's crippling us." Littlefinger chimed in, a sardonic edge to his tone. "Crippling is a strong word, Master Brax. Lannisport merchants remain among the richest in the realm. The crown's records show a healthy flow of coin in your coffers." A ripple of amused murmurs spread through the onlookers. Brax's face reddened, but he pressed on. "We do well, yes. Yet these new inspections require us to sit idle for days at times. Could we not pay a standard fee up front and bypass the thorough rummaging of each crate?" Robert considered. He loathed the notion of giving special treatment that might open the door to actual smuggling. But a compromise might glean more revenue if structured properly. He tapped a finger on the throne's arm. "How do I know your men won't slip contraband through once we let them skip inspection? A single upfront fee doesn't guarantee honesty." Brax hesitated, exchanging glances with his fellow merchants. We would, of course, allow random inspections to ensure we remain compliant, but not the full procedure every single time. Let's say 1 in every 3 shipments is inspected thoroughly, at random. In return, we pay the Crown a set sum per shipment. Littlefinger and Ned shared a look. Robert could almost hear their thoughts. This system could reduce the burden on the Crown's inspectors, while generating immediate coin. It wasn't a perfect deterrent, but it might be workable. Before Robert could respond, Ned spoke quietly. We must also ensure that contraband discovered in any random inspection results in severe penalties. Heavier fines, perhaps confiscation of ships. Otherwise, merchants might treat the fee as a license to smuggle, gambling they won't get caught. Brax gulped. Agreed. We'd accept such terms if the penalty is proportionate. Robert nodded at Ned, then turned to the merchants. Very well. I'm open to such an arrangement on a trial basis. We'll fix the fee based on your cargo's declared value, and a random inspection will occur at least once every 3 shipments. If smuggling is found, you'll lose the entire cargo and the vessel. Understood. Brax and the others exchanged more frantic glances, but they knew they'd gotten as much leniency as they could hope for. That is acceptable, Your Grace. We appreciate your reasonableness. A faint smirk touched Robert's lips. Reasonable, yes, but not indulgent. Cross me, and you'll see how quickly that changes. They bowed, murmuring grateful responses. Robert signaled for them to withdraw. The onlookers started to disperse, some casting calculating looks. A few lesser lords stepped forward with minor petitions, but Robert wrapped up quickly, delegating most to Ned or to local justices. By midday, the throne room was nearly empty. Littlefinger sidled up to Robert as he descended from the Iron Throne. That was deftly handled, Your Grace. The new arrangement might yield a fair sum for the treasury, and let us keep a close eye on Lannisport shipping. Robert gave a curt nod. Just make sure we actually collect the fees. I won't have them shorting us or forging ledgers. That's where I come in, Littlefinger said with a smug grin. Fear not. They parted ways, and Robert felt a pang of relief. Another day's business managed, another subtle puzzle solved. The next item on his schedule was a private training session with Ned and a few trusted knights. Although he sparred regularly with the Gold Cloaks, Robert valued the quieter sessions where he could hone more precise techniques. War might be coming. He could not afford to be out of shape if forced to lead men again. They met in a smaller courtyard, ringed by a stone colonnade. Ned arrived wearing a simple padded gambeson, and Ser Jorah Faring, a Crownlands knight, stood ready with a practiced sword. Robert warmed up with basic swings. In the crisp winter air, each movement sent a slight twinge through his muscles, still stiff from mourning. But once he loosened up, a familiar power coursed through him. Ned stepped forward first, taking a practice blade. They exchanged a series of measured blows, each feeling out the other's timing. Ned was a strong, steady fighter, less flashy than Robert but disciplined. The repeated strikes echoed sharply. Robert found a comfortable rhythm, testing Ned's defenses. At last, he feinted left, then shifted to a high overhead strike. Ned tried to parry, but Robert's raw strength forced Ned's sword aside, leaving an opening. Robert halted the swing before it struck Ned's shoulder. Ned panted lightly, nodding with approval. Your speed has improved, Robert. Robert grinned. I've had plenty of practice these last months. He lowered the blade. Shall we give Ser Jorah a turn? Ser Jorah stepped in, bowing politely. They took positions, Robert once more feeling that electric sense of anticipation. He and Jorah circled each other, each watching for the slightest tell. Jorah was younger and faster, while Robert relied on power and cunning feints honed in real battle. The knight lunged, forcing Robert to block hastily. They broke apart, footwork scuffing the courtyard's flagstones. Ned watched intently, offering the occasional piece of advice. The duel wore on, the crack of wood filling the air. Robert noted that Jorah was quick with his ripostes, but struggled against heavier onslaughts. Pressing that advantage, Robert launched a relentless flurry. Jorah managed to dodge or parry most, but one blow hammered his sword aside, and Robert's follow-up caught the knight's flank. Were it steel, the blow might have broken ribs. As it was, it rattled Yora enough to stagger him, gasping. They ended the session with mutual respect. Yora bowed deeply, praising the king's skill. Robert recognized in the knight's eyes the mixture of awe and pride that came from facing a monarch who fought as if on the battlefield. After a quick wipe down and some water, Robert parted ways with Ned. He took a moment to rest under the colonnade, leaning against a pillar. The sun broke through the gray sky, warming his face. He realized with a faint smile that it was the simplest moments he now savored, sword in hand, the crisp taste of winter air, the quiet satisfaction of a fair victory. These were things he had neglected in his years of drunkenness, drowning memory and regret in endless cups of wine. His reflection was cut short by a messenger arriving with a small rolled parchment. The man bowed, panting as though he had run half the castle. "Your Grace, urgent word from Dragonstone." It arrived by Raven. Robert accepted the parchment, scanning it quickly. The message bore Stannis's neat, rigid script. "Brother, unusual movement of ships near the stepstones. My lookouts report sails of Myrish design. Possibly a sell-sail company? Destination unclear. Will attempt to intercept and question. Recommend readiness in King's Landing should these vessels approach Blackwater. More ravens to follow." Stannis. Robert sighed. Another potential threat. The Stepstones, a cluster of islands in the narrow sea, were a notorious haunt for pirates and mercenaries. If Targaryen gold were paying for sell sales, they might be moving toward the Stormlands or the Crownlands. He tucked the note into his belt, rising to find Ned. More planning, more vigilance, this was the life of a sober king. He did not complain. Better to face these threats while fully aware than let them fester as they once might have. He found Ned in the corridors, speaking with Renly. Both turned as Robert approached, noticing the tension in his stance. Robert handed the parchment to Ned, who read it swiftly and passed it to Renly. Ned frowned. Sell sails from Myr might be headed anywhere, but if they skirt around the coast, we should watch for raids. Renly blew out a breath. "We can't spread our fleet too thin. We've already assigned ships to watch the Stormlands. The Vale is secure but still unsettled, and Stannis holds Dragonstone. Maybe he can intercept them." "That's his plan," Robert said. "But if these sell sails slip past him in the night, they could land near King's Landing or even further north. We'll have to keep a patrol at sea." Ned nodded. "The Crown's navy is bigger now than it was, but not enough to cover all coasts. We'll need to coordinate with the lords whose castles line the shores. Ensure their Ravenry is ready to report any suspicious landings immediately." Renly pursed his lips. "This starts to feel like a cat-and-mouse game, with Targaryen gold paying for every shadow that crosses the sea." Robert rubbed his forehead. "Aye, but we won't be mice. We'll station watchers along the coast. If Myrish sails appear uninvited, we respond with force. Let's draft orders tonight, have them sent out by morning." They agreed, and Robert headed to the war room with Ned, the two men collecting maps and ink. The rest of the evening was spent marking potential landing sites, identifying which local lords would serve as first responders. They wrote letters to be dispatched by Raven. Robert, though weary, felt a grim satisfaction in the thoroughness of their approach. The realm would not be caught napping again. As night fell, he dined sparingly, alone in his solar. Candlelight flickered on the walls, and outside the windows, the city's lanterns dotted the darkness. He couldn't help thinking of the Targaryen girl, Daenerys, somewhere across the sea. Perhaps watching these sell-sail movements with calculated interest. Or perhaps she was even more cunning, orchestrating them. He wondered if she had inherited the madness that plagued some of her ancestors, or if she was a more measured force. Either way, she was an enemy to his crown if she aimed to land on Westerosi shores. His meal finished, Robert stepped onto a small balcony overlooking the Red Keep's outer walls. The chill air tugged at his cloak. Far below, torches lit the main gates. He could see the city's streets winding away, pinpricks of light indicating taverns, inns, and homes of all shapes and sizes. Somewhere out there, Small folk lived their lives in cramped quarters, many grateful for whatever stability they had. Robert considered that if he failed to hold this realm together, war would devastate these streets. The memory of the Sack of Kings Landing during the rebellion still weighed on him, the cruelty unleashed when discipline faltered. He refused to let that happen again. If Daenerys Targaryen came with an army, he would meet her steel with steel. If conspiracies arose at home, he would crush them as he'd done in the Vale. And if Tywin Lannister or anyone else tried to undermine him, he would not shrink from confrontation. But he had to balance aggression with prudence. The realm was not infinite in resources, and a single misstep could reignite old grudges. At times, the weight felt unbearable. But then he remembered the small boy offering him fish, the courtyard training that reminded him of his warrior's heart, the sense of purpose that came from truly ruling. That was worth the weight of the crown. Days bled into weeks. Ravensaid watchers along the coast reported scattered sightings of suspicious ships, but none made significant landfall. Stannis wrote again to say the Myrish vessels had drifted south toward Dorne. Whether they aimed to contact the Martells or simply skirted the coast remained unknown. Robert sent a polite but firm letter to Prince Doran Martell, reminding him of their peace and urging him to stay alert for pirates or sell-sails seeking a foothold in Dorne. No direct threat, but a clear stance that the crown expected cooperation. Meanwhile, Joffrey kept to a minimal attendance of his lessons. The boy's attitude remained sour, but at least he didn't openly rebel. Cersei, for her part, withdrew into an icy distance, hosting private gatherings with her Lannister kin whenever they passed through the capital. Robert let her be. He had neither the time nor patience for her constant barbs. They lived under the same roof yet occupied separate worlds. In the midst of this uneasy calm, word arrived that the Braavosi envoys had landed in Crackclaw Point and were traveling south to King's Landing. Robert prepared to receive them, determined to show that the crown was stable and responsible about its debts. He arranged a modest reception, no lavish feasts that would appear wasteful, but enough to display courtesy and confidence. The Braavosi entourage arrived on a cool, drizzly afternoon, escorted by a handful of City Watch riders. Their leader, one Magister Ravos, was a tall, thin man with an aquiline nose and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore dark robes embroidered with silver thread in swirling patterns. His attendants were similarly dressed, all with poised manners. They bowed deeply before Robert in the throne room, the droplets of rain sliding off their cloaks. "Your Grace, we bring warm greetings from the Iron Bank," Ravos said in accented Westerosi. "We appreciate yo." Robert inclined his head from the throne. "You're welcome here, Magister Ravos. We stand by our agreements with the Iron Bank. I trust your journey was uneventful." Ravos gave a polite smile. "Quite, Your Grace. Your roads are well policed, which speaks well of your governance." A subtle flattery. Robert nodded. "You'll find we take security seriously." He invited them to a smaller audience chamber for detailed discussions. There, Ned, Littlefinger, and Grand Maester Pycelle joined them around a polished table. Servants poured wine. Robert declined it, taking only watered ale. The Braavosi eyed him curiously, perhaps recalling rumors of the king's once legendary indulgences. Robert offered no explanation, letting them speculate. Talk soon turned to finances. The Iron Bank was pleased with the crown's partial repayments, but wanted a clearer timetable for the remaining balances. Littlefinger produced ledgers, referencing new revenue streams, licensing fees from Lannisport merchants, improved tax collection, tightened spending at court. Ravos listened intently, occasionally asking incisive questions about the stability of these measures. Robert answered plainly when needed, letting Littlefinger handle the finer details. "So you see," Littlefinger concluded, tapping the ledger pages with a flourish, "we can maintain our current rate of repayment and potentially increase it slightly after next harvest, barring unforeseen events." Ravos and his companions exchanged glances. The Braavosi Magister spoke slowly. "We are encouraged by your progress, indeed, but unforeseen events can be many, particularly in times of rumored unrest or potential external threats. The Iron Bank invests in stability, Your Grace. May I ask how your kingdom fares with regard to the Targaryen question? Silence fell over the table. Robert studied the Braavosi carefully, noticing the mild curiosity in Ravos's eyes. The man wasn't prying out of mere gossip, he was evaluating risk. If a Targaryen invasion destabilized the Seven Kingdoms, the crown might default on its debts. The Targaryen girl remains across the sea, Robert said evenly, and we see no sign of an imminent invasion. My lords are loyal. We have already dealt with minor conspiracies. Our coasts are watched. Should any threat arise, we'll respond decisively. Ravos nodded, face impassive. That is reassuring, Your Grace. The Iron Bank merely wishes to ensure that our valued partner remains secure. If there is any support Braavos might provide in maintaining that security. Robert held up a hand, cutting him off gently. We appreciate the offer, but we have matters in hand. The realm stands united. Should an invasion come, we'll repel it ourselves. A faint smile curved Ravos's lips. He might have read the subtext. Robert had no desire to become further indebted or to rely on Braavos's hired blades. Very well. As for the schedule of repayment, we find your proposals acceptable so long as we review them annually. Littlefinger sealed the arrangement with an exchange of formal documents. Pycelle affixed the royal seal, muttering about the dryness of the wax in such weather. Robert watched with mild relief. This was one more step in demonstrating to the world that he was no incompetent drunk, that the crown was no crumbling edifice. The Braavosi would leave with favorable reports, peaceful roads, consistent repayments, a vigilant king. That evening, the envoys were treated to a modest banquet. Robert sat at the head of the table, conversing with Ravos about the wonders of Braavos' canals and the Titan, the colossal statue at the harbor. He asked about news from the free cities, gleaning more insights into trade routes and mercenary companies. Ravos provided cautious answers, but Robert detected no sign that they were withholding crucial intel. The Iron Bank had no reason to champion a Targaryen cause if the Baratheon throne remained a more reliable client. When the dinner ended, the Braavosi retired to guest chambers with polite thanks. Robert returned to his private rooms, sinking onto a cushioned chair. Ned joined him for a final briefing, summarizing the day's achievements. Robert could sense his friend's quiet satisfaction at how smoothly the negotiations had gone. "You've come far, Robert," Ned said as they concluded. "There was a time you couldn't even be roused to attend a meeting with foreign bankers." Robert let out a humorless chuckle. "It's true. I hated all this talk of coin and debts. Still do in some ways. But ignoring it nearly ruined us." Ned clapped him on the shoulder. "We're in better shape now. Let's keep it that way." They parted, and Robert prepared for bed, though sleep eluded him longer than he liked. As he lay in the dark, thoughts circled. Targaryen threats, potential cell sales, Joffrey's uncertain future, the next steps in governing. He wondered if, in some corner of the world, Daenerys Targaryen was as restless in her own bed, plotting her rightful place or conjuring new alliances. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him. The following days proceeded without major crisis. The Braavosi left satisfied. Stormland lords reported no fresh raids, though rumors still circulated about strange ships passing the stepstones. The realm's roads remained largely safe and bread prices stable. A sense of tenuous peace settled over King's Landing, as though the city was exhaling after holding its breath. Yet Robert knew danger could erupt at any time. He continued his daily routines, council sessions, training, walks through the city, like a man fortifying himself for a coming trial. Cersei's aloofness persisted, while Joffrey maintained a grudging attendance at lessons. Myrcella and Tommen, quieter children, spent their days with septas and tutors, mostly out of Robert's direct sight. He occasionally wondered if they might be easier heirs to guide, gentler souls, less prone to cruelty. But naming them would invite Lannister fury, perhaps a civil war. Winter's cold grew sharper. Frost coated the Red Keep's windows each morning. The White Ravens from the Citadel had not yet declared the end of the season, so the capital braced for more chill. Bundled in heavier cloaks, the people seemed subdued, but not desperate. That alone was progress compared to the near famines of previous years. One gray afternoon, as Robert examined the keep's outer defenses, a rider galloped in through the main gate, mud spraying from the hooves. The man wore the sigil of House Bar Emin, a small crownland's house near Massey's Hook. Breathless, he dismounted, demanding to see the king. Robert, curious, stepped forward. The rider's eyes widened at the sight of him. "Your Grace," the rider panted, "I bring urgent news." A large fleet, at least 20 ships, was spotted passing near the gullet. Their sails appear to be a mix of Myrish and Lysini. They didn't land, but they were heading north. Robert's heart thumped. North toward Blackwater Bay? "Yes, Your Grace, it seems so." They were moving at a good speed. Robert turned to Ned, who stood at his side. "We need the Navy ready. Alert Dragonstone. Summon our warships. If these cell sails are heading for King's Landing, we must intercept them before they approach the bay." The rider swallowed, sweat mingling with the chill air. "House Bar Emin stands ready to assist, but we're small. We ask for the Crown's backing if it comes to a fight." Robert gripped the man's shoulder. "You'll have it. Ride to your lord. Tell him reinforcements are coming. Keep watch on that fleet from the shore. Signal us by Raven if they land anywhere on Massey's Hook." The man nodded, then hurried off to stable his horse and prepare for a return journey. Robert and Ned exchanged grave looks. Was this the moment they dreaded? A cell-sail fleet funded by Targaryen coin, sailing straight for the capital? Or something else entirely? Without delay, Robert summoned captains of the Royal Navy. Plans formed rapidly. The main war galleys, stationed in the Blackwater, would move out to form a blockade if the unknown fleet approached. Smaller swift cutters would scout their position. Messenger ravens flew to Stannis at Dragonstone, calling for him to muster any ships he had. The city watch was placed on alert. Archers were assigned to key towers. It was a flurry of activity, reminiscent of a battle mobilization. Robert felt adrenaline surge through him. This was the old feeling, preparing for war. Yet he took no pleasure in the prospect of bloodshed. If it came, it must be swift and decisive, lest King's Landing suffer. Night fell. Torches lit the docks where the royal fleet prepared to sail. Robert stood on a pier, cloak whipping in the cold wind, as a captain named Ser Maddox reported the readiness of half a dozen warships. The plan was to patrol the bay's entrance, scanning the horizon. If the Myrish Lysini vessels appeared hostile, they'd be challenged. Robert considered boarding one of the warships himself, his old soldier's instinct, but he knew better. He had to remain in the capital, the command center of the realm. At dawn, the royal galleys departed, dark silhouettes against a storm-gray sky. Robert paced the docks restlessly, Ned by his side. Seagulls squawked overhead, feasting on scraps from fishermen. The gulls' raucous calls only heightened Robert's tension. He imagined these cell-sail ships bristling with men eager for plunder, perhaps wearing Targaryen symbols secretly. Or was this just a traveling mercenary company with no intention of attacking? Hours passed. Robert returned to the Red Keep to coordinate from the war room, receiving occasional ravens from the scouting cutters. They reported no immediate contact yet, only glimpses of sails at a distance. The unknown fleet seemed to hover south of the Blackwater, near a cluster of small islands. By midday, another raven arrived. The cell-sail fleet was anchored, possibly waiting out rough waters or assessing the Crown's response. Robert dispatched a final warning through an experienced courier aboard a swift sloop. Turn away or declare peaceful intent at once, or face the Royal Navy. The tension in King's Landing soared, rumors spreading that an invasion was at hand. Robert ordered calm but readied the city watch for any sign of trouble. Late that night, a drenched messenger staggered into the Red Keep's gates, escorted by a gold cloak. He carried a battered scroll bearing the insignia of a Myrish mercenary commander, some outfit called the Sea Griffins. Robert, Ned, and other key advisors gathered in the throne room by torchlight, their breath visible in the cold. The messenger, trembling, handed over the scroll. Robert broke the seal and read by the flickering torch. To His Grace King Robert Baratheon. We sail under contract from the city of Myr, en route to a negotiated dispute in Tyrosh. We have no quarrel with Westeros, but rough seas and the threat of pirates compelled us to anchor near your coasts. We assure you we do not carry Targaryen banners or intend hostility. We will depart Westerosi waters within 2 days, weather permitting. We seek only safe harbor and provisions. Captain Orals of the Sea Griffins. A hush fell. Robert read the letter twice, searching for falsehoods. It was plausible enough. Myr and Tyrosh had long-standing rivalries, and mercenary fleets sometimes traveled between them. The question was whether this was genuine or a ruse. Yet no explicit mention of Daenerys Targaryen appeared, nor any threat to the crown. Ned studied the parchment over Robert's shoulder. It could be true or it could be a trick. Robert stared at the messenger. Tell me, boy, did you see any Targaryen sigils or hear any talk of dragons among them? The pale messenger shook his head vigorously. No, your grace, they mostly swear in Myrish. I heard them say they want to avoid conflict with the royal fleet. Their captain insisted I deliver that scroll to prove they mean no harm. Robert narrowed his eyes. And if it's a lie? Ned spoke up. We can allow them to purchase limited provisions but keep them under watch. If they remain anchored for more than 2 days, or if we see signs of aggression, we attack. Grand Maester Pycelle, who had joined them, nodded gravely. Yes, let them show their peaceful intent by leaving promptly. Robert mulled it over, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Fine, I'll respond that they have 2 days to leave our waters. If they make any hostile move, we'll sink them. If they're simply passing through, best to avoid needless bloodshed and expense. So it was done. Ravens flew to the royal fleet with instructions. Stand guard, do not engage unless the cell sails break terms. Another small sloop carried Robert's message back to Captain Orals. 2 days of safe anchorage, nothing more. In the end, the cell sails complied. They took on fresh water, bought some salted fish from local merchants at inflated prices, and set sail again. Scouts followed at a distance, confirming they continued eastward, away from King's Landing. The tension in the city gradually subsided. No invasion, no bloody skirmish. When the last scout's raven arrived saying the Sea Griffins were gone, Robert allowed himself a long, weary sigh of relief. The city's watchers had performed admirably. The realm had flexed its muscle, and if Daenerys Targaryen was behind none of it, so much the better. Still, the near scare served as a harsh reminder of the precarious state of foreign affairs. Winter continued to creep along. Robert pressed forward with internal reforms, ensuring each region reported regularly. The crown's debts stayed on track for repayment. Merchants from Lannisport, the Reach, and even the North found the new system of inspections and fees workable, if not ideal. The small folk, from what Robert could glean, were no longer on the brink of starving or succumbing to unchecked banditry. Laws were enforced with growing consistency. Yet, in the silent corners of the Red Keep, Robert remained vigilant. He knew a single stroke of misfortune, a cunning conspiracy at home, a surprise landing from a foreign power, could unravel everything. He strove to remain strong, physically and mentally. Each morning brought him to the training yard or to the council chamber, each night a new swirl of tasks. Though he often yearned for simpler times, he found meaning in this daily test of will. Occasionally, he allowed himself to remember his younger self, the brash warrior full of laughter and thirst for life. That man had faltered under the weight of kingship, drowning in self-pity and regret. But this older Robert pressed on, forging a new legacy. If Daenerys Targaryen did arrive on these shores, she would not find the realm easy prey. If the Lannisters or any other great house tried to subvert the throne, they would face a king who did not cede his power to drink or despair. One late evening, near the close of winter's darkest month, Robert stood once more on his balcony, the hush of the city below him. A light snow fell, dusting the ramparts and rooftops. He breathed the cold air, letting it fill his lungs until they ached. He recalled the day he had slammed his hammer into Rhaegar Targaryen's breastplate, the roar of the crowd along the banks of the Trident. Then he remembered the day he first woke without wine, determined to rise from his moral slumber. Both moments shaped him. He had won a throne by war. He preserved it now by vigilance. In some deep, unspoken corner of his heart, he wondered if he would ever truly be free of conflict. But perhaps that was the nature of power. It demanded watchfulness, or it slipped away. He could live with that so long as the realm was secure, and the ghosts of the past did not swallow the future. Snowflakes landed on his beard and melted, droplets trickling down his jaw. Beyond the city's lights, the horizon stretched into darkness, where unseen seas lapped at the coast. Maybe Daenerys Targaryen still plotted. Maybe forces beyond the narrow sea brewed storms. But for now, Robert Baratheon was king in truth, not just in name. And he would face whatever came with the unwavering resolve that had once shattered a dynasty. He turned from the balcony and walked inside, the torchlight casting his shadow tall against the wall. Tomorrow awaited, another day of governance, of training, of fatherhood, however strained. He would meet it with clear eyes, free from the haze of drink, guided by the duty that once felt like a curse but had become his chosen path. Let the realm watch and the enemies whisper. Robert Baratheon was no longer a man lost in wine. He was a king who had reclaimed his purpose, prepared to hold his crown against the storms ahead, by the strength of his sword, the cunning of his counsel, and the unwavering will he had at last discovered within himself.